Running slightly behind, but hopefully we can make up the time. And we're taking lunch at 12:30 to 1. Strictly at 12:30. What's that? Yep, Chapter 16, Industrial.
Right, just going to talk you through very quickly the changes from the workshop version that you saw previously. Some of it I've touched on already, namely the interface with schools and open spaces and the deletion of rules, which are part of phase 1. I'm just going to focus on area-specific provisions that are in the version before you. These relate to land off Springs Road, the land north of Waiariki Road, and the Mail site. There's been a review of the rules from a legal perspective, but also there's been a review of those rules against the statement of expectations. We've needed to consider what are we doing to be more enabling and to reduce consents. Now, as an outcome of that review, we've identified that rather than what the phase 1 chapter reads as at present, which is that you have the general rules and then you've got site-specific rules below that, and you're effectively there's repetition of every activity table through the whole chapter. We're changing the format, and so that's why the format of the rules before you looks different to what you saw in the workshop. It's avoiding the repetition of every activity table and relying on one at the start. So it's not a change of substance, it's really a format change. In terms of just starting with Springs Road, which is the land west of Springs Road and to the north of the proposed southern motorway, there's proposed to be, from the version you saw last, we're amending a rule which related to there not being any use of the setback for outdoor storage. And rather than applying that approach, we're proposing that there's a rule which requires screening of any screening by way of landscaping or buildings to manage that interface, as opposed to saying simply no to any use of that setback for storage. Waiariki Road, which is the land north of Waiariki Road and going up to Harewood Road. It's land between Nunwick Park and Russley Road, and it's a natural extension of the Tate campus. The same zoning as the Tate campus for that matter. There's some changes proposed, and the nature of these changes is to consolidate the rules and avoid us having another set of site-specific rules in the plan. The problem we've had in recent years is every plan change has introduced new site-specific rules, and you end up with a much bigger document which is more complex and difficult to use. And having regard to the statement of expectations, we need to make it easier to use and to apply. It's not just about making it easier to use, but also taking a consistent approach through the chapter. So where there's a setback from a residential zone boundary, that setback shouldn't differ for every individual area that we identify as a subzone. So it's really applying that consistent approach. So I'll just talk you through those quickly. There's a special height limit for this block. Sites within 50 metres of Wardridge Road and Stanley's Road, we proposed initially a height limit of 11 metres, but we're proposing a blanket height limit of 15 metres across that area, which reflects what would be allowed beyond 15 metres in the previous version anyway. The second change is in respect of the road setback. The previous version you saw required a 20-metre setback from Wardridge Road and Stanley's Road. We're proposing to apply a generic approach as is in phase 1, which is that setback's reduced to 6 metres. That sounds significant, but there's a need to be consistent in our approach, and through rules on site coverage and landscaping, we can still achieve a park-like environment as anticipated for that zone. I'm now going to talk about Mail, and before I talk about Mail, do you have any questions to that point?
We'll go Tim and then Yanni.
With regards to changing the setback from 20 metres to going back to 6 metres, it's significant to remember why we wanted the 20 metres.
So the 20 metres came about the Tate campus, which is already zoned and under development. The 20 metre setback applied on the frontage of Wardridge Road and Stanley's Road, so that buildings were well set back, and so it had a feeling of openness as viewed from the road. Now, the general rules that apply to the industrial park zone, as introduced in phase 1, only propose a 6 metre setback in that similar zoning. The question then is, what justifies that much greater setback in this location as opposed to any other location. And to be honest, the argument is weak in that respect, because the outcome for that specific area relative to another industrial park zone is the same. We still want an open environment with landscaping, but that's to be achieved by site coverage rules, which limits the maximum coverage of any site to 50%, and also requires that 20% of the site is landscaped. So there's different ways of achieving the same outcome. It doesn't require that significant setback, and a 20-metre setback, to be honest, would result in potentially the inefficient use of land, notwithstanding the site coverage limit of 50%. So, yeah, no, that's fine.
Cool. So cycleway along Russley Road would be really good. And also, just if you could just comment on what those T's are for intersection improvements. Are they traffic lights?
T's are where there's an upgrade required to those intersections, and there's a rule which requires that there's signals at the intersection of Woodward Road and Harewood Road, and that the intersection of Stanley's Road and Harewood Road is limited to left in, left out. That's to manage traffic flows and to address, it's about managing the effects of what's proposed in that area identified for rezoning, but I'm aware there's currently issues along Woodward Road, which would be also addressed in part through signals.
But just like, is there an integrated traffic assessment that looks at this kind of wider area?
Yeah, so as part of, to inform the rules, we had consultants prepare a transport assessment to evaluate the effects not just of this area, but also to look at other development that's planned through the land use recovery plan or identified through the land use recovery plan.
I'm still struggling to understand, and maybe I never will, that if you just keep adding traffic lights to your traffic system, you make it really inefficient.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we didn't consider Area 1 to be appropriate to rezone in this phase, which is land north of Waimakariri Road, which is an old gravel pit, was that the pressure from that area, which is north of this area, would effectively require some upgrade and potentially signals which would be additional to these ones, and that's going to impede obviously traffic flows relative to one set of signals. So it's about managing that traffic environment and not eroding the function of Harewood Road, which will continue to be a main collector road through the city.
Right, and so can we put a cycleway along Russley Road, like per a cycleway kind of plan? I know we've got a cycleway coming somewhere in here, but I don't see where it's connected.
The upgrade of Russley Road as planned has been subject to a notice of requirement, so effectively an application by NZTA to designate land along that section to support the widening and to limit access to Wairakei Road to left and left out. That notice of requirements recommendation's been made back to NZTA, and it's pending an appeal which is unrelated to that area. So I'd need to look at NZTA's plans and whether there's any provision for cycleways along there. I know that there's been...
I was just thinking then, sorry, that I know NZTA and they're not keen, but when we got a whole area that's going to get developed, we should be requiring cycleways. It should be just part of, we are investing in major cycleways, and we actually need them to actually, you know, we encourage stormwater.
I'd need to liaise with our transport network team, but as a...
No, yes.
The plan.
The notice of requirement is a separate matter to this, and potentially David Falconer, who's coming to speak with you on the transport chapter, might be in a better place.
Can I just be clear? We're being asked to approve an outline development plan.
Yes.
Right. So if you want to put cycleways in as part of the outline development plan, you have to do it now.
The problem is that the notice of requirement is ahead of that outline development plan.
What we can require on Rusty Roads outside the scope of what could be achieved by these rules. So there's not a lawyer, but legal advice indicates that you can't impose requirements which are beyond the control of the developer. So the upgrades I talked about of the intersections on Harewood Road, they're not requiring the developer to put those changes in. It's effectively the rules halt development at a certain point before those upgrades occur, Similarly, we couldn't require a cycleway, the developer to provide a cycleway on Russley Road. You could require that, you could limit the scale of development in the zone until a cycleway is put on Russley Road, but then NZTA would hold the would have control of whether that's appropriate or not, and I think that NOR process has overtaken things, and if there's no cycleway plan, then the opportunity is closed to a degree on that. It doesn't preclude, though, future cycle provision along Woodward Road or Stanley's Road, which, to be honest, may be a far more conducive environment for cyclists than riding along a state highway.
That's kind of my point. If you look at where the school is, and you look at where people might have been cycling, you've now got all this heavy traffic going on and extra traffic. So requiring the developer who is going to make huge profits from rezoning this land to provide a cycleway, I actually think is really sensible. Like, I just cannot believe that we continuously allow these developers to maximise their profits at the expense of local amenity and local community and the things that we want to do as a city. If we really want to support cycling, we can't just spend all the money ourselves and allow new developments not to be as cycle friendly as possible.
What's not legally possible is to require works that are beyond the control of the landowner. A way to address it would be that you put a limit on development until there's a cycleway in place, which then the developer can only proceed so far with their subdivision before that cycleway is put in place, and that requires council to take a role in leading the development of that cycleway and obtaining monies from developers to fund that. The other way to do it, rather than imposing a limit on development until there's a cycleway in place, is to require that there's a development, that you require that there's a cycleway running through the land. The difficulty of that approach is that unlike other areas like Preston's and other greenfield areas, this area's got 14 different landowners and is made up of lifestyle blocks, and is unlikely to be, every one of those landowners, I know for a fact, won't proceed with development at the same time. And so in order to achieve a cycleway through their land, you'd have to require each section to be developed as and when the landowner or a developer comes along, proceeds with the subdivision. So you'd potentially end up with a cycleway to nowhere and the connecting pieces put in later. They'd put in vehicle access, yes.
At the same time as they put in good vehicle access.
They could do. We could introduce a rule to require a cycleway as part of the road network through the zone. That issue I just raised is obviously relevant to a road as much as a cycleway running through multiple properties. So yeah, we can, subject to the discussion, we can address that.
I think that would be fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
From what Yanni's saying, I mean, it's probably not a question for here, but it is a question with regards to when we're looking at our roads and our roading networks and building our roads, surely as just a standard it must include a cycle lane, because we've just kind of, it's almost like, that's, until Vicky mentioned that, it's a separate issue. In actual fact, if we're going to build a road, it has to include a cycle lane. I mean, so there's no question.
Well, it should have to include a cycle lane.
It should have to, but at the moment it's a separate issue, which it shouldn't be. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The issue here, though, is that cycleway has to follow what design standards? I mean, our cycleways across the city, depending on where they are and on what roads, have got varying requirements as far as design standards go. So how are you going to apply that? I mean, this is a massive piece of work. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. Well, it is. You've got to work out what the rules are. I mean, how big is the road and what will that trigger as far as what's required for design standards? I don't want people just painting white lines and there's their cycleway and they've ticked the box.
In theory, where we can, what we should do is separate the cycle, like physically, from the road. So they've got to build a road. Alongside the road, they actually have to build a cycleway. It's a big chunk of land. They've got to put a road through it anyway. If we don't start putting cycleways through overall development plans, We're just going to hold back our development of cycleways for a long time.
We can't do this on the
They
fly.
have to do this, they have to do a road anyway. So I'm not sure what sort of road they have to do, presumably a local road.
This is a subject for the subdivision development chapter, not for this particular chapter.
Okay,
And it does relate to the design standards that Transport has for when and where various footpaths go in, cycleways go in and what have you. You don't want a cycleway down every single road that's being put into the city.
So we've got that. That's chapter 8, and that's coming up after lunch.
That's correct.
So we'll have the relevant people that can speak to that. Then
Yes.
so we'll park that and revisit that after lunch.
Right, I'll just, what I've got left is mail, and then I'm closed. The mail provisions, we've revisited and looked at how they achieve the state, how they fit in the context of the statement of expectations, and have sought to rebalance the scales, for want of a better term. I'm just going to focus on height, setbacks and landscaping, and rules that differ from the last version you saw. I'll start with height. We're retaining the height limit you saw previously of 12 metres for buildings within 50 metres of Memorial Avenue. Beyond that 50 metres, the previous version allowed guest accommodation to go up to 20 metres within a defined area, but for other activities, the maximum limit for height in that area was less at 15 metres. Now, there's a question of what I call permitted baseline, and by that I mean, if guest accommodation can go to 20 metres, what's the effect of other buildings going to 20 metres, and why should they be limited to 15 metres? So it's about consistency and approach. Now, guest accommodation is limited to a smaller area, fronting Memorial Avenue and Russley Road, but there's, in my view, no reason to restrict other buildings to a lower height limit relative to guest accommodation. And so what's proposed relative to the last version is that the height limit's increased to 20 metres across the zone, with the exception of that lower height, whilst retaining the lower height limit of 12 metres within 50 metres of Memorial Avenue. In terms of setbacks and landscaping, for those that know the site, there's a boundary that the zone has with the Commodore Hotel. And in the previous version put to you, the setback required from that boundary was 20 metres, which is quite significant. Bearing in mind that on the Commodore Hotel site, the rules for that zone proposed in Phase 2 only require a 6 metre setback. So there's some degree of inequity there. Granted, the height limit in the Commodore Hotel site is 11 metres, and the height limit on the Mail site is greater at 20 metres. But what I'm putting forward to you is for the eastern boundary that the 20 metre height, 20 metre setbacks reduced significantly down to 6 metres, which is the same as applies to the Commodore Hotel from their boundary. Now, in terms of the increased height limit that the Mail site has of 20 across their zone, the effects of that 20 metre height limit on the adjoining Commodore site would be limited by recession plane rules. So we've got a requirement that no building penetrates for a 45-degree angle from 2.3 metres above the boundary. So you're not going to end up with a 20-metre tall building 6 metres from the boundary. In fact, you'd need to be set back 17 metres from the boundary at least to achieve 20 metres while still being within the recession plane. So that's the first point I wanted to make on Mail, or second. Avonhead Road, the setback in the previous version we proposed was 15 metres, and we're proposing to reduce that to 6 metres. The basis of reducing that setback to 6 metres is for consistency with other industrial park zones where the provision is for 6 metres road setback from for 6 metres setback from road boundaries where it's opposite residential, and it's really about consistency in that respect. The final interface I just want to touch on is residential activity within the zone. So within the Mail site, which we're zoning to industrial, there's 2 residential properties at present, neither of which are owned by the proponents of the Mail plan change. Both have houses set well back from the boundaries, and in the previous version, a setback of 20 metres was required for any development within the Mail site from those residential properties within the Mail site. We're proposing to, rather than relying on setback and landscaping rules, simply imposing a recession plane requirement so that buildings can be much closer, but there's still a recession plane that they have to be within. So that example I talked about of needing to be at least 17 metres from the boundary to achieve 20 metres would apply. And for that matter, even if it were 3 metres from the boundary, the maximum height would be 5.4 metres. So I've spoken about 3 different boundaries: Avonhead Road, the eastern boundary, and residential sites within. And we're proposing a more permissive regime by way of these changes, which I welcome your feedback on. The same applies to landscaping, where we're reducing landscaping requirements from those same interfaces relative to what you saw before, and that's to acknowledge acknowledge that we need to be consistent with other rules that apply to other zones of a similar nature, but also to recognise that we need to rebalance the scales.
I've just got a few questions with regards to Memorial Ave, and you're proposing the setback to be 6 metres.
Oh, sorry, from Memorial Avenue, we're retaining the 20-metre setback as per the
This
council's
is from the
submission.
Copthorne Hotel boundary to the mail site.
So then the other question is, between the hotel and the industrial area, you're talking 6 metres instead of 20 metres, and you're looking at solely for height. But what about noise? Because it is...
Noise would be controlled by noise standards in Chapter 6, which Alison's going to speak to you about shortly.
Yeah, we see a lot, though, of incidents in Christchurch, and we've got some issues in Lower Kashmir with regards to that, and also odours. And odours are incredibly hard to deal with, and it's almost after the fact. So I was presuming that the 20-metre setback between the hotel and this industrial area was to cover more than just a height restriction.
It wasn't intended for the purpose of nuisance. It was more about the scale, although in hindsight that seems excessive, that 20-metre setback, and there's other controls on the plan to manage the nuisance effects of noise. Odour is a matter that would be subject to control through the Regional Council's rules.
All right, do we have any other questions on this one?
It's after.
So it sounds like any other things that aren't around the built form that are in our jurisdiction anyway are under Chapter 6 for the general rules, but this is just purely around building the structure.
Apart from odour, because that is a regional
Anyway,
council.
so that has nothing to do with us. All right, any questions, guys, or are you comfortable to move to the recommendation?
Just before we do, in terms of the recommendation, I should briefly talk you through it.
Can you move down? Can you scroll it down? Thank you.
Yeah. There's, for the area north of Wairakei Road, it's a case of reinstating rules which relate to the boundary with the rural urban fringe zone and the school, Harewood School, so that we still have a setback and landscaping requirement. And so that's what the first part of the recommendation is. The second part relates to, if you can scroll down, the second part relates to the Memorial Avenue site, the mail site we've just been talking about. And there's a rule which requires, the intent of the rule was to require there's a fence and landscaping along the boundary between an internal road and Russley Road. And the purpose of that rule was to avoid vehicles within the mail site driving along and their lights distracting vehicles heading south on Russley Road. The rule needs to be reworded to address that, so this is really just reflecting what was intended, but better wording. So that's the extent of that change. And the third part is about the coastal environment, which is quite different, obviously. There's, through the coastal environment chapter and other chapters where those zones are within the coastal or near the coastal environment, there's a need for assessment matters to acknowledge the effects of development on that. On the character, but also access. So that was just reinstating what should have been in there, and that was in the previous version you saw. So that's the extent of what I wanted to raise with you.
Okay, great. Yep, one question from Tim.
I'm still concerned with regards to going from a 6 metre setback to from a 20 metre to a 6 metre between the existing hotel and an industrial area that's being proposed. And I know that we have rules, but I've seen in our community that it's like we've got the rules, but it takes a while for them to work, and in other situations it just goes on and on and on. So I'm concerned that we've got an established business. We do need development, but I thought the 20 metre was for a protection for the existing industry or the existing hotel. And I'm still concerned
Okay,
about that.
so I guess what the question is there, and it's a valid one, could understand the precedent around the 6 metre setback that the Copthorne has, and if you had another Copthorne 2 there, you could mirror that and have 6 metres on that side. Given that this is light industrial, so a different use, notwithstanding the fact that there may be a hotel within the male side as well, but given that it is a light industrial zone, why did we do the same as the Copthorne's rules? Given the different
Sorry, I should
zoning?
have pointed out, it's consistency with the general rules that were proposed in phase 1 for the industrial park zone. So
that's consistent with industrial parks anywhere that is 6 metres.
yeah, so the other locations that there's an industrial park zone are the land north of Wairiki Road,
Yep.
and then land off Wilmers Road in Awatea, but open to consideration of that.
Accepted that Memorial Ave is a special because it's the gateway to Christchurch, so we've allowed for a 20 metre there, and so that's an exception to the rule. So this is a site which has been going for some time. So I'm just wondering, we've made an exception there, why not look at that? 'Cause
That was in the previous version put to you in the workshop, and that, in hindsight, seems excessive relative to the effects. Yeah.
All right, Paul and then Yanni.
It was actually Tim's.
Then just
the fact
Yanni.
that Memorial Ave being a Memorial Ave.
All right. Yeah, but remember though, this is the boundary from Copthorne to this site. It's not Memorial Ave.
No.
To the
And
structures on the male site.
just to make you aware, it's also dealing with the boundary with Avonhead Road and the boundary with residential properties within the zone. So just bear that in mind too.
In all, would it be fair to say that I couldn't imagine that driving past there, really you will actually notice it from a resident or a observer's point of view. That's something it's not really happening directly in your line of sight. The relationship or the restrictions around how close it can be to the adjoining property there.
The affected parties in this respect are going to be the Copthorne. Residents on the opposite side of Avonhead Road, because we're dealing with the setback from Avonhead Road as well, and the residents within the zone being 2 households.
Yep.
So with regards to Avonhead Road, there's a number of properties on the south side of Avonhead Road. If we've got a 6 metre setback with a 20 metre building, what are the loss of amenities with regards, because obviously the sun's on the north side, so what is the modelling with regards to their loss of value?
The potential is for some sunlight to potentially not, for sunlight to be blocked to an extent. One option to address that is to introduce a recession plane requirement on that road boundary so that you've got a 45-degree angle running from the road boundary up into the male site, which buildings can't penetrate, which would mean 20 metres building could only be achieved at least 17 metres from the boundary of Avonhead Road.
However, if you went to 15 metres, as was originally proposed, those buildings could actually be a lot closer.
They'd still have to, if you have no recession plane requirement, then yes, yeah.
But if you still got that 45 degree, 20 metres is at 17 metres, 15 metres I would imagine would be a lot closer. It has to be.
Yeah, the previous version we put to you of 15 metre height limit had a setback from Avonhead Road of 15 metres. So
Has there been any feedback from the properties on the south side of Avonhead Road with regards to the change of this proposal?
they've made submissions on the plan change and are concerned about the effects on that interface.
And were those based on the 15 metre height or the 20 metre height?
It was based on the plan change as notified, which proposed bear with me a moment, proposed a 15 metre height limits with a setback from Avonhead Road of 15 metres.
Great.
So just to take that to its logical conclusion, the Avonhead community are concerned about even the previous version I put to you.
But they are not aware of the change, proposed change to 20 metres with this?
Not at the moment, although if the...
Oh.
So they did have a problem with 20 metres.
Reducing it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this conundrum, isn't it? Because
Yeah, but remember this is professional planning advice, not political intuition on how what we think will get residents riled.
Oh, actually, it's about, it's
Sorry.
like, whose city is this?
We just,
Oh, not saying it doesn't.
excuse me, can I just, my question was meaning, we've gone out for consultation and feedback from the public for the 20 metre, for a 15 metre height. We're now looking at a 20 metre height, which those that have
No,
been...
I'm sorry, there has been no consultation,
Oh.
as you know. Since we've truncated the timeframe for these chapters, there has been no public consultation on this matter, but we will be, post the 2nd of March, going out there and ensuring that the people are aware of what's in these chapters so that they will put submissions in if they're concerned.
The feedback I spoke about
Yep.
was expressed in submissions on the private plan change request.
Oh, it was, okay.
Okay, no, that makes it clear.
It's consistency with the approach taken to other industrial zones and the general rule in phase 1 to the industrial park zone of a 6 metre setback from road boundaries.
So I guess what I'm hearing from the committee around here is totally understand precedent and consistency with other industrial areas, but I guess what I'm taking is, and I agree, that this isn't just any old industrial. Pendleton Waimaris. No, it's no. The reality is, that it is the gateway to the city, so we're obviously and very close to a residential area. A gateway to who? Yeah. Yep. So anyway, hearing what you're saying there. So apologies to Yanni as well. I gave him a second question, but Yanni had his hand up. So lucky last question from Yanni.
This is specifically around Memorial Ave. I don't see any discussion about the impact on the centre of the city, and I would have thought that's quite a key consideration. Like, allowing development to happen, intense development to happen away from the central city, actually, particularly things like hotels, etc., has an adverse impact. So is there any assessment that's been done about what this does for the central city? And you might recall the 2 articles in the paper this week from inner city people that can't find tenants and, are feeling obviously very frustrated.
We, in the Section 32, haven't commented on every rule that's in the proposal. In terms of managing those impacts on the central city with limited office activity to 5,000 square metres, and in fact retail activity is limited to an ancillary function, and so it has to be ancillary to another permitted activity. So retail and office are the key ones. We've got quite tight controls on those to avoid impacts on the central city, and that gives support to what's sought in the central city Christchurch Central Recovery Plan.
Could I just state also that no doubt in the Section 32 for the commercial chapter there would be quite a bit of discussion about keeping the central city as the primary location.
So with like the St Elmo's next door, how many, would that be about 5,000 square metres, or? I'm just trying to understand the kind of context of what 5,000 square metres is. How big would it be?
It's akin to, there's the office development on Lincoln Road heading south on the right-hand side that was built post-earthquake.
So the media works.
Yeah. From memory, that's 3 to 4. Sorry, 3,000 to 4,000 square metres. Oh, I couldn't tell you the height.
But you're talking GLFA, so the gross leasable floor area.
I'll need to confirm that figure I gave you. It's
No,
off general memory.
I was trying to think of something then too, but yeah, it's a reasonable amount.
Yeah. So Show Place, Hazeldean, that'd be about 5,000.
The total of Show Place is in the order of 25,000.
And then just I had a question around the brownfield sites. Just on page, sorry, there's no page number on it, but you've got the proposal. I was just trying to get my head around, you've talked about phase 1 and phase 2 and the rezoning.
Yeah.
So the ones that say proposal to rezone in phase 1, I presume that's already happened, so we just disregard that. Yep. The ones that we should be interested in are phase 2, which is railway land between Wilson's Road, South and Inchills Road. Proposal to rezone in phase 2 to transport zone. So Is there a map of where those zones are and what transport rules?
That will be coming, that's with you as part of the phase 2 package of rules. So the transport zone provisions apply, and it's because it's still railway land, I understand.
Right, so is there anything else happening in brownfields that we should be aware of?
Essentially, we undertook an exercise to identify potential sites like those listed here where residential development could be enabled by rezoning, and there's very few large brownfield sites out there, despite previous work undertaken. What we have done, though, is included a policy in phase 1, so any proposal that comes forward for a site that we haven't identified at the current time, that proposal will be considered against the policy in more favourable terms than what would otherwise be the case.
Right. Are we at the point now where we can move those resolutions and there's nothing more to add, no more questions?
So what?
Area with Memorial Ave. It's a gateway
Talking
to our
about
city.
height, not
Height.
setback.
No, just height.
Okay. Is there a staff comment on that? Is that defendable? Is there 15 metres?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question.
The statement of expectations is always in our minds. It's we'll need to consider the reasons for justifying a different height limit for buildings that aren't guest accommodation. Taking a more restrictive approach to buildings for office use, for instance, and applying a 15-metre height limit relative to a 20-metre height limit for guest accommodation begs the question: what's distinguishable? I think we could still argue that the area for guest accommodation is limited to the frontage of limited to a defined area on the ODP, which is generally the northeast corner. So we could argue that a lower height limit of 15 metres is to manage effects on the surrounding interfaces to the south and to the east. So, yeah.
Okay, is that something that people are wanting? You know, as I said, I'm in your hands with this. I can see pros and cons either way. You've heard the explanation from staff. Should we
It is
make
such
that,
an
would you
important...
like that changed to 15?
In terms of the recommendation, there's a section further down about the Memorial Avenue site. We could add a rule there. To save time, we could just put a point, apply 15-metre height limit to the full extent of the zone,
Excluding the hotel.
excluding the area within 15 metres, within 50 metres of Memorial Avenue.
And is this an okay way for you about going about this, or is there a preferable?
When you say okay way, it's your decision about what you put in the plan at this stage. When it comes to writing evidence, whether or not it can be fully supported on the basis of what comes back from the Minister's comments is another story.
Well, that's what I'm particularly wary about. You know, there's no point us putting in things that that you can't defend. There is no, that's just...
I totally understand that, but the fact of the matter is this is such an important gateway to our city.
Yeah, I
we
appreciate
have to be
that.
so careful with what we develop. So I would like to go with the 15. I'll go with the,
Yeah, and in all honesty,
That's
with this,
absolutely
this goes without saying, but I'd be sharing that view. Whether it's in the Whenua Māori ward or not actually makes no difference. It is a key area. But okay, the only thing that sort of worries me a bit around it is the implications that may then have on the leasable floor space. Does that just mean that it's going to then have office space proliferated more around the site? You're squashing it down, really.
Yeah, that has an effect.
So you're going to get your best return from office space as opposed to warehousing sort of stuff. So, with everything like this, it's never been more true than the domino effect in planning. So you squeeze it down, and the flow-on effect as a result of that is probably more office space and less P&P print sort of type places in there.
Subject to how you manage the setbacks, what you want to do on the setbacks and landscaping, that by reducing the setbacks, you're providing more capacity for the spread of development.
5,000 square metres is actually quite a lot, though. It really, and I do understand that they will say, look, this isn't taking away from the central city sort of stuff, but it is going to, really, a little bit. It will.
The basis of the 5,000 came about from discussion on the Tate campus. You'll recall some at-length discussions about providing for it in Tate, and same zoning, same environment anticipated, and it was acknowledged in that discussion that a high technology environment, there's going to be a greater amount of office. This is the same zoning, same outcome sought, and so the ability to defend a position that gives 5,000 to Tate but not to Mayo.
But Tate is also an existing head office for a technology company that's been there for as long as I can remember.
But is the Tate campus on the gateway to the city?
No,
So,
no, it's not.
And the argument before about the height and changes things, you go 30 metres and change things again. The fact of the matter is, and it's a single argument I have, is that this is the gateway to our city.
Memorial Avenue.
Yeah, Memorial. The setbacks around the rest, fine, 6 metres, but this is the key to our city. We're recovering, we need tourism, we want to drive it. The last thing we want is people get around the roundabout, go into the new flyover and see something that we don't want them to see. So we've got to be so careful how we move forward. And I appreciate the work that you've done, but I really am going to stick with the 15 metres.
On the basis of Councillor Scandrett's comment, can we add to the recommendation, please, that the section 32 also be amended to recognise the location of the site being in the path of the gateway to the city, or something to that effect?
And the war memorial that it's named after. But, any thoughts then on the 5,000 square metres? If you bring that down so it doesn't have a flow-on effect, do you try and cap that and say 3,000? I just think it's completely different to the Tate site, though.
There is no competition.
Something to bear in mind is that the Mail plan change is notified, included that same provision, and our submission on the plan change didn't oppose that.
No, okay. Well, we've... Yeah, exactly. Look, we've spent a lot of time on this, guys. Got to a point that we're all delighted with. Should we go back to the recommendations then? And can we, that's effectively included in there because that's now the body of it? All right. So I'm sure Tim will be delighted to move that. Are you happy to second that? Oh, I've got Phil seconding it. Look, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.